Afternoon, and thanks for coming to this session on responsible mining. It's an interesting title, and we'll get more into what that means. I know that there's been a lot of discussions on critical minerals. It's an area that is interesting to me because I've recently joined actually a company called Fulcrum Ventures, where we're basically connecting buyers and producers of critical minerals from around the world. I'd also like to introduce our esteemed panelists. This is Tom Hazlett. He's the Director of Energy and Critical Mineral Supply Policy at DFC. And then Alan Carroll, who's the Deputy Director of Government Affairs at KoBold Metals, which has been in the news quite a bit with large investments from major players that you can talk about as well. But the focus of this conversation, there's been a lot of conversations on critical minerals about some of the gaps in upstream and downstream, as well as some of the policy issues in terms of tariffs and price floors. But this conversation is kind of pivoting towards what are the actual positive benefits of mining, particularly to the local communities in which we're working with and our partner countries in which we're investing. And so, I think mining has kind of had a bit of a soiled reputation because of things like poor labor practices, environmental degradation, negative effects on the communities in which we're working. And so we want to kind of show a different side to the critical minerals sector. So with that, let me just start with opening it up to the panelists. I mean, there's been so much conversation about critical minerals, particularly in Washington and the US in the last several years. What is this drive for the acceleration and the urgency in this conversation? I think I'll start with you, Tom.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. And for folks who don't know, Kay was actually my first boss in the U.S. government when I started my big boy career at Millennium Challenge Corporation many years ago. So I'm really excited to be on the stage with her and appreciate being here for this topic. So I think if you look at, I've been working with DFC in this position for a little over 3 years. And I think if you look at the increased focus on critical minerals investment that came up during the Biden administration, it was strongly aligned to goals that were associated with action on climate change, so EVs, batteries, et cetera, et cetera. And that, I think, mimicked a broader trend in the economy to recognize the need for significant growth in minerals that are going to support energy technologies, that are going to support advanced technologies like AI, like data centers, that are going to support defense industries. And at the same time, and I think this has been the greater focus under the current administration, a recognition that the US was in a very poor position as a result of decades of underinvestment that had allowed China, which was investing at a very strong clip, to develop an industry which put the US economy and the economies of all of our allies at risk. And so I think we've had a real confluence of different drivers which have led successive strong bipartisan support for engagement in the critical minerals space to address any number of challenges and really shore up the US and allied economies for future growth, both by increasing supply and creating a more secure supply chain.
Thanks, Tom. And I think based on what Tom said about the urgency and the confluence of events in the last several years, I'd like to direct the question to Alan and kind of talk about what has KoBold Metals done in the last several years and kind of how have they optimized on this momentum, this sense of urgency, US government policy and investment as well as private sector interest.
Yeah. Well, KoBold is a critical mineral exploration firm, and to take what Tom said and sort of speak at it from the other angle, there is this increased demand, and that demand will only grow in the years to come. But sort of KoBold's raison d'etre and really where we intend to make our mark is that when you look at new discoveries for deposits over the last 30 to 40 years, they've actually declined in size and quality rather than grown to meet demand. So there's something wrong with the way exploration is being done traditionally, because that should be inverse, right? And so where Cobalt is trying to make a difference or is doing something different is to look in new and different places, deeper, using new and novel technologies, AI, machine learning, and novel sensors to find new and better deposits in order to meet that growing demand. So we've had success in Zambia with the discovery of Mingomba, which is a world-class copper deposit that is superb in size and quality, and have a global exploration portfolio in Canada and the United States, Sweden, Finland, DRC, Australia, and will continue to grow as we continue looking for the materials to meet the demand that Tom identified.
Great, very helpful. Back to you, Tom. I mean, DFC has an interesting mandate. You know, as mentioned in a previous session, it's described as a bank in that you do need to have some kind of financial return, but you also have a development mandate. And so can you kind of talk about those two mandates and where they can be complementary and where they sometimes can come into conflict?
Sure, yeah, and I'd add to that you know, DFC also has a dual mandate to support U.S. foreign policy objectives, which, you know, can align with the objective of achieving development impact and the objective of ensuring a healthy or at least a reasonable financial return to the U.S. government. But yes, there are some times where those points come into tension, but just wanted to mention that we complicate things even further for ourselves. So I think that we are focus on finding projects that as much as possible do try to square the circle of those different issues. A lot of times mines that are successful, that are financially viable, are going to deliver a lot of benefits to local communities in the form of jobs, in the form of infrastructure investment, in things like, you know, water or schools or other aspects of that the community can use, or, you know, roads that might be used by the mine, but also might be used by local communities as well. In addition, they tend to be significant revenue generators for the national government. Now, you know, I know there are always questions about how those revenues are used, and I think that's something where it's important to have continued work on governments that are acting in the public interest. But again, the mining projects do tend to do that. And so I think what we find is that if a mine is going to be successful from a financial standpoint, it is likely to be also good for the local community. Of course, that gets into the fact that you need to make sure that it does no harm in addition to the benefits, and we can talk about that a little bit more later, I think. But, you know, I worry a little bit less about the dynamics in terms of development impact and financial viability. I think on a strategic level, you know, what we're trying to do is invest in mines and projects that are not typically as attractive to the private sector, at least without government support. And so there are, I think, greater tensions in the sense that maybe we want to focus on minerals like rare earths or graphite or antimony, where they're not actually very strong commercial projects, but the strategic payoff to them can be quite significant. And so we, I think, work consistently to try to balance how far can we go, how flexible can we be, what can we do to try to get closer to provide the support that these mines need without sort of wrecking our ability to remain a going concern and to be good stewards of taxpayer money. You know, some of what we can do is look at how we're creating a balanced portfolio rather than just saying, okay, is this project good or is that project good? The other thing is, you know, being a good partner to our clients. So if there are challenges with an investment, are we working through it with them in a way that makes them more likely to be successful? You know, we don't want to just foreclose and come in and get our money back. We're invested for a strategic reason, which I think is very attractive and helps those companies out. I think a good example of that was recently in the news was DFC restructuring a loan it had made to to Twig, which is a Mozambican graphite mine owned by Syrah Resources out of Australia, where we essentially restructured that partnership to allow the mine to continue operating in the face of some financial and operational challenges, while also securing the U.S. government position there. So again, I think we do have to balance these. It's more art than science, but it's something that we're really emphasizing and think can be done if we're deliberate about it.
Okay, very interesting. I mean, I've noticed that in recent years, DFC has pivoted to work in more of the lower income countries, which is somewhat new for DFC, just kind of a larger portfolio footprint in those countries. Based on that, I mean, it's interesting that Cobalt has gone in there with lots of investment going into Zambia and DRC. I think sometimes these countries in which we're working have a bad reputation because the governments are not upholding, let's say, the labor standards or the environmental and social standards. We have some of our clients that are offtakers, and we have to really persuade them strongly to buy from Africa because of all this sort of risk or perception of risk. But I wanted to turn the question to Alan to kind of talk about the reality of doing business in countries like Zambia and DRC. How can we tell these off-takers that, these standards are being upheld? What are you doing as a company to ensure that?
Yeah, well, we like to say at Cobalt, we go where the rocks are. We don't have the luxury of being able to work anywhere in the world. We have to work where the geology is favorable. And so there really isn't an alternative to a place like the African Copper Belt. That's where, if we're going to meet the demand that we spoke about earlier, we have to be there. And I think every jurisdiction has its own issues and should be looked at independently from one another. So, I would say in Zambia, we've been extremely lucky because Zambia has been a phenomenal place for us to do business. The problems, every mining project, I'm sure, in the world, in human history, has problems of some variety or another. And our problems in Zambia are pretty boring, which is good. And I think that's helpful and that's reassuring. To answer your question on sort of standards and driving standards up, that I think is what is attractive about American investment in this moment, because American and Western businesses like Cobalt operate with a rigid framework for how we conduct ourselves. Our investors demand that. Compliance here in the United States demands that. And so that is something that we bring with us when we operate in jurisdictions around the world. And I think that's actually an attractive proposition for these jurisdictions. I think to compare, others in the industry, particularly in that region, that have been successful by not following standards, I think there's exhaustion and frustration with the results of that and the damage that can do to your workforce, to the region, to your environment, and there's a hunger for an alternative model, and that's what Cobalt is offering.
Yeah, it's interesting actually talking to some of our clients in Africa, some of the producers that, traditionally the Chinese have been there for decades, investing and off-taking the key minerals. And so it's an easy win for them, but there is a strong push to pivot to Western countries, particularly the United States. And I think that there's appeal about how American companies treat the local communities, try to adhere to the standards, try to respect the sanctity of the contract and things like that. So I wanted to turn to Tom on this point about, I think the great competition, and how does DFC deal with that, ensuring that their investments are attractive to our partners, but they might be slower because they have higher standards.
It's a good question. And, one thing that comes up a lot, I think, is that people do want things to be faster. They say, they sometimes look at, environmental and social risk as, or processes to manage that as like externally imposed and, divorced from project desire. And, I think that's just a mistaken premise. I think if you go talk to almost any sort of mining company executive, and I think you've highlighted it very well here. I mean, almost number one on their list is getting good community relations, making sure that you're aligned well with the local population, with the government, and so on. And it's not because they're hippies or anything like that. It's because it's environmental and social risks are project risks like anything else. It's a project risk like a supply chain risk is a project risk. It's a project risk like market risk is a project risk. If you are not following the right processes, you're exposing yourself to legal procedures downstream, even in countries where maybe you feel comfortable because there's a dictator. Sometimes those people change and then they open things back up and maybe you're put on pause for a while. If you create a problem with the local community, whether, poisoning the water or firing a bunch of them without cause, then you are putting yourself in a position where they may come up and blockade the mine later. If you're creating environmental damage, you're opening your company up to liability. You're opening up potentially your financiers like DFC to liability. And for us, that's even leaving aside the basic reputational risk and the fact that, again, as responsible stewards of taxpayer dollars, we do not have a mandate to go out and invest in projects that are going to do a bunch of harm. That's not what we were established for. That is not what people want out of us. And I think sometimes, yes, the reality is there are places and there are markets, including the US, where permitting processes are not clear or they're too slow and you're taking a lot of time on steps that maybe don't need that amount of time. But you got to take the time to do the things that you have to do, and form can follow function. And we really do have, I think, a pretty rigorous set of processes that are attractive to the countries where we want to work. As Kay mentioned, there are a lot of places that are very interested in finding alternatives to Chinese investment, but they'll say, this is all that's been available to us for a while. If you give us something different, we're ready to look at it. And if you're planning ahead, I think it's something that you can manage. One of the big issues that we have to deal with right now is the US and its allies are so far behind the ball that there's a sense of panic, and there's a sense that maybe we do have to skip steps. Maybe we do have to do these things faster than what the way they should be done because we're in such a bad position. I still don't think that's correct, but certainly over the longer term, so 5 years from now, 10 years from now, we're not in exactly the same position. We need to begin building now, and we're doing that, and you can really take the time you need to do things in exactly the right way and make sure that everybody is benefiting, the right risks are captured and mitigated, and again, have good outcomes for everybody. So again, I think this is something that we need to do today, and it's something that we need to do for the future, because these are, again, are also long-term relationships. You're invested in a project for Mingomba, maybe 40 years, longer.
50 plus.
Huge amounts of time. And so it's not like something where you can pop in, create a bunch of trouble, and hope it doesn't affect you. I mean, it's people, their children, their grandchildren are going to be remembering what you did.
Just on that, talking about Mingomba in Zambia, Alan, we had a discussion about what you guys are doing at the community level to ensure that you're mitigating some of these risks in terms of, social tension or environmental degradation. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I can, and I just want to briefly tie into something Tom just mentioned, which is their grandchildren will remember what you did. My finding myself at Kobold is kind of an interesting story. I didn't necessarily expect to be involved in the minerals and mining industry. It wasn't a feature of my early career, but it was a feature of my childhood because my grandparents and my uncles were coal miners in Western Pennsylvania, and there's endless stories that I could tell you of mine closures or layoffs or collapses or emphysema. That's part of my family history. And that's very much at the forefront of my mind, and I think similar thoughts are, at the forefront of everybody at Kobold's mind. We want to do it safely. We want to make an effective mine that produces, but we also want to be good neighbors. And so we've made pretty significant investments even before we've made $1 from production. Our mine we're breaking ground on construction this month, so we still have years to go before we'll be a producing venture at Mingomba, and already we've built a secondary school in the local community that did not have a secondary school building. It had a primary school, and the secondary students had to meet under a tree or find classroom space wherever they could. We're preparing as part of our groundbreaking to open a maternity ward at the local level 1 hospital that will serve probably up to somewhere between 100 to 150 women a month. And these are really early. It's a really early time to make these significant investments, but I think we're aware of the fact that, one, we will be in this neighborhood for a very long time. We want to be good neighbors, and we want to make sure that we have earned the trust before we're well down the line. So this is something that animates every aspect of what we do. And to add a sort of another layer of this competition that we've been discussing really throughout the day, is that the workforce model that Cobalt offers, and I would say most American ventures would offer, is one where local employment is really the value, right? Our workforce at Mingomba is remarkable, and they're all Zambian, right? And that is something that I think others in the industry, particularly in this part of the world, other foreign investments in the industry, that's not a model that they offer. And even when they hire local, the treatment and the training and the conditions are not at the standard that we would be proud to work in and work alongside our Zambian colleagues with. So that's something that we take very seriously, and it's something where we see a genuine competitive advantage for us and for the jurisdictions that we operate in.
I thought that was particularly interesting about Cobalt because oftentimes, even if you're employing people at the sort of more junior level, you bring in sort of the executives that are international or American. But in the case of Cobalt, your CEO, right, is Zambian as well?
Yeah. We're an American company based in California, but the CEO of Cobalt Africa is a Zambian. Everyone in our executive leadership team in Lusaka is Zambian. It is a Zambian company, and the same pattern is repeating itself in the DRC. We've hired a director general for our operations in DRC, Benjamin Katabuka, and he's building a local team that is second to none in the country. And that's how we're going to do business wherever we go.
Very interesting. I also wanted to talk about the technology aspects of mining. I think that in the last few years, there are a number of companies that have heavily invested in technologies at each stage of upstream to downstream in terms of the critical minerals sector. And I know that Cobalt has invested quite a bit. Can you talk a little bit about sort of the AI aspects, machine learning, and how you've applied that and how that can also potentially contribute to more responsible mining?
Sure. I would say the most responsible mining, there are business activities that any business can do that make you a better business, a better member of your community, things like the investments I mentioned earlier in the school and the hospital and other things. But when it comes to specifically mining and how to be a responsible miner, I think a good way of framing it is an efficient miner, right? You can make discovery decisions faster and be more economical and build a stronger foundation when you find a superb deposit, right? That's the quality and size of Mingomba is one of the factors in why we're able to make these early investments, because we know that it's economically viable to do so, right? And that gives us breathing space, the quality of the discovery of the deposit. And so when we invest in machine learning that helps us make our exploration decisions faster and find better deposits, that really, as a knock-on effect, serves the people we work with and the communities we're in. So the industry itself, I think, is catching on to the idea that improving the way you do exploration and investing in exploration technology, which is something we're leading. We like to claim that we are the #1 investor in critical minerals exploration technology. And I think that's probably true. It might have been truer a couple of years ago than it is today, which is a good thing. We're glad that other people are following in our footsteps. But by leveraging those new technologies to move faster and be more efficient, then we have more breathing space to do other things.
Okay, very interesting. There's been a lot of discussion just in terms of the application of technology in terms of recycling. So instead of digging mines, can we actually use recycled materials and extract the key minerals for that usage? So I was just curious, in terms of DFC, have you been investing in sort of those technological advancements that can help, be a little more environmentally sustainable, again, another aspect of critical minerals and mining that can help turn the page on, what otherwise would be sort of a story of degradation.
Sure. So first, I'm going to go ahead and point out that I believe that the mining investments that we do make are going to be environmentally sustainable, and that's a key part of what we do. So I'm just going to put that out there at first.
Okay.
But yes, definitely agree that recycling is a part of the solution. And I think we're very excited. I know our Chief Investment Officer has spoken quite a bit about his interest in working on critical minerals recycling projects. The reality is we've had relatively limited engagement with that to date, in part because in order for a recycling plant or facility or approach to work, you need the source materials. And a lot of critical minerals are, they might be mined in, let's say, the DRC, but they're used in the US or Japan or Korea or Europe or China. And we have not been able to work in high-income countries, and so therefore it has prevented us from looking at those types of projects. There are some things that I think are coming down the pike that could be quite interesting. Morocco, I think in particular, is setting itself up as a recycling hub. I think they want to do it the right way. There are real concerns about the dumping of e-waste and scrap in some countries that then leads to situations that are not actually beneficial. Maybe it's good for people in developed countries because they get material more cheaply, but it's not good for the system as a whole, and that's not kind of what we're supporting. But high quality, high standard recycling built on their proximity to Europe, their ability to access large amounts of power, and so on. And I think even more and this is one of the things that I think has been inspiring to me in the time working in the critical mineral space, because it was kind of an issue that was under the radar for a long time. There was not as much brain power and capital that was being applied to the issue. And I think the fact that it has now become more of a focus area means that there's going to be ways to find new technologies, new business models, because it's not just about, can you break down battery and get the materials out. It's like who owns the battery is like a big question in EVs. How do you get the batteries back? All these different things. So again, I think that there are going to be a lot of exciting opportunities coming out, and some of those may, filter down to emerging markets, but also we'll pursue them in more advanced markets. But the last point I'll make is, not all critical minerals lend themselves to recycling, and in some situations, I think if you look at, rare earths, we're not going to be at a critical mass of material that can be recycled for a while, because sort of the revolution in how a lot of those minerals are moving into the economy is still relatively early stage. And so, we're still going to need to do mining. We're still going to have to do it the right way. But yeah, eventually you hope to have a system that relies more on cheaper sources and has, again, the business models and technologies to go along with it.
Okay, very helpful. So a lot of times we talk about sort of the need for speed in mining, because this is a critical moment, and so I think that tension between speed and doing things the right way, as we've talked about, often come in conflict. If you could look at what the mining sector looks like 10 years from now, 2036, what are sort of one or two key things that could help contribute to the speed and the efficiency, but also being responsible, benefiting the communities in a positive way, again, adhering to environmental and social standards? So, Alan, if you want to take that.
I think cobalt gets a little lonely in the part of the world where we operate, as there are graphics we use that show sort of where cobalt is active with an American flag, and then we look at our neighbors that fly other flags. And I think one of the things that will address that is getting other Americans investing in the part of the world where we are. It is, just creating an ecosystem that can work together collaboratively of Western investment particularly in Africa, in Zambia and DRC, would do wonders, I think, in both quality of life for the folks who are working there, working with us, but also in shaping attitudes towards, if we're discussing reforms in a given jurisdiction, the use case or the benefit needs to be shown by active investment. Why do we need to make this change? Well, it will attract this and this and this investment, and there's momentum that can build if that's generated. So looking ahead 5-10 years, I think that getting other Western and American businesses that are sitting next to us or down the road or what have you is going to be key for solving that problem.
Great, thank you. Tom, what are your thoughts?
Those are I think, great points. And again, I think the point about kind of de-risking and destigmatizing the mining sector is really important. I mean, my wife still will say like, when I talk about sort of mining work, and I say, well, throw out your phone, we'll get rid of the car. You do have to have this industry. And I think that a couple things that I hope that happen. One is I think increased education for the public in the U.S. and other advanced markets to understand both the importance of mining and the fact that it can be done well. And especially if there's demand for that, it can and will be done well. Because again, even this sometimes comes up where people say, we're going to cut China out of the supply chain by introducing high environmental and social standards. Chinese can do that stuff too if they have an incentive to do it. And so, hopefully, again, raising sort of the bar across the board will both increase the quality of mining operations globally, but also bring more people in who have felt uncomfortable with that in the past. I think in terms of more efficiency, one of the things that I would like to see is, and there is some discussion, is around standards. So, we use, for example, the IFC performance standards for our projects, but there are things like RMI, IRMA, Copper Mark, all these different standards, some of which are mineral specific, some of which are more generic in terms of the mines that they can apply to. I think if people agreeing more on that, getting some more consensus around which standards are really going to be applicable, and then getting an ecosystem where we can have some more confidence in the auditing process that goes into you getting one of those certifications. I think they do a good job now, but it's still pretty early stages, and there's not that many mines that have that. So I think that would be great because, again, it kind of gives you something like a stamp of good approval off the bat, and that helps a little bit too. And then I think, again, continuing to kind of build demand at the level of emerging markets and other countries where mining is happening, to the extent that historically they've been kind of takers and saying, well, it's only the Chinese who are showing up here and they're going to do what they're going to do. If we can change that dynamic as well, it gives them a negotiating chip to improve discussions with any mining company. Hopefully it's U.S. or Australian or Canadian or what have you. But even if it's the Chinese, to have a better discussion with them and say, no, here are the standards that we need. Some of that, I think, we're seeing the State Department start to do more work on issues related to regulatory aspects, legislative aspects of the mining sector in some of these markets. The Commercial Legal Development Program is doing something similar. So I would like to see more of that as well to, again, kind of create a broader demand and understanding of what that looks like in these places.
Great. No, that's great. We have a few minutes left in our session, so I wanted to make sure that we allow the audience to ask questions. If I could have you introduce yourself, your name, your organization, and then hopefully make it a question and not just a comment, please. Gentleman in the front.
Howdy, I'm Carter Freeze from Wyoming, CEO of Triumvirate Metals, which I operate in South Sudan right now. My question is a little bit more on the US side of things, which is the Bureau of Mines was abolished. And so now we have 18 different government agencies that kind of all have their hands in mining, permitting, et cetera, et cetera. And you and Mr. Copley have done a fantastic job of kind of breaking those interagency boundaries and creating cohesive responses to what to do about this. But what do you see the future of that, especially in future administrations? Do you think rebuilding a Bureau of Mines to consolidate that, and especially in the international investment space, and building a critical mineral reserve to fight Chinese manipulation of the market is important? And what would your vision be for what that bureau could accomplish? Or should it remain decentralized and more in the private sector?
Great, thank you. Why don't we, because that was a very specific question, why don't we just have Tom respond to it directly, and then we can go to the next question.
Sure. So I'm going to punt completely on anything related to domestic issues, and all credit goes to David Copley and his crew on that. I think at an international basis, one of the things I think I can't remember, somebody who works in this space in a think tank wrote that DFC was not initially established as a mining financing institution. And there's certain things that we, maybe would be doing differently if we had had been set up that way. I think, look, we are trying to be flexible, and we're trying to work with other folks like EXIM, like the State Department, like USTDA, to make sure that we're offering a full suite of products that can really meet companies where they need. So that includes for feasibility study work, that includes political risk insurance to protect their investments, that includes debt to really drive, meet capital costs, but it also includes, just the presence of us in an investment to help mobilize additional capital. We are, I think, doing a lot more coordination, some would say, myself included, too much coordination with the interagency to try to make that better. I think it's still not something we're as successful as we could be. We've talked about, common applications. We actually have an internal listserv now that kind of allows different agencies to send opportunities that they're getting to make sure that it's reaching the most appropriate agency. And so I'm hoping we'll see more of that. Institutional change in the U.S. government is really hard, especially if it requires an act of Congress. So I think I always view it as more possible. What can we do with what we have right now? And I think that's what we'll continue to pursue.
Great, thank you. There's another hand in the back.
Hi, my name is Maria, and I'm a renewable energy researcher at UVA. My question is that a lot of countries that are very resource rich, they do not have very strong regulatory structures, they don't have strong institutions. So you already talked about benefiting the local communities. In case there is a mismatch of priorities between local communities and their national governments, how do you deal with such situations? Because it can also pose risk in case the US invests in those communities where the mines are and they turn against the mining companies. Thank you.
I think actually either of our panelists could respond to this question. You could talk about sort of the tangible examples in Zambia.
Yeah, I would say with a note of caution, we haven't, I don't think, encountered a situation where there's this significant discrepancy, right? I would say that the first principle is that we're going to follow the law, right? And so there are, that's at the forefront of our mind no matter what. But generally speaking, especially in Zambia, I don't know that there's this break between the interests of the our neighbors and the regulators in Lusaka. We found it to be a pretty productive conversation. So I'm sure what you're saying is real in other jurisdictions or in other circumstance, but I don't know that we have a story to tell on that.
I think what I would say is that we, have our own standards that we're bringing to the table. Obviously, if there are processes and requirements and laws that we have to comply with, that is something that we will ensure that our sponsors are doing. But we're setting a floor under what we're going to accept. And while we don't know if we can, we can't necessarily affect change at the national level if if the national government is going to let other companies, other projects go forward under conditions that we wouldn't accept. We're realistic that we can't necessarily solve that, and there's other parts of the US government that might get involved. The projects that we work on are going to meet our standards, and if they don't, then we are not going to invest there. And that includes working with local communities and ensuring strong community consultations, because we're aware of that. A lot of these mines are in far-flung areas. They're perhaps not very well served currently by the government, and so you have to recognize that as well. So again, when we come in at a project level, we're doing the things that we know we need to do and setting that as the standard.
That's great. We are past time, so unfortunately I'm going to have to end this conversation. It's been very thought-provoking. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Tom, for coming to this discussion. I hope this is the beginning of this type of discussion on responsible mining in Washington, and we can kind of continue thinking about ways to improve the sector for the benefit of the local communities and our host country nationals. Thank you so much.